Hi everyone, it's Amelia here, and you are watching the monthly Q&A for Bad Astrologers patrons. I'm so excited as November comes to a close and December finally begins. We've made it through one of the most astrologically difficult years in recent memory in some of our lifetimes. And I am thrilled to be able to give y'all some advice as we forge ahead. We have some really great questions today, which is like no surprise, not a secret, because the patrons of Bad Astro are the absolute best. So let's get right into it and dive in. Our first question comes from Dana, who says, I'm curious how you think about signs and houses that you do not have any planets in, especially signs that you might otherwise identify with. For example, I am extremely relationship oriented and a huge peacekeeper / people pleaser. Before I knew anything about astrology, I always identified very strongly with Libra. Hers is in the 5th house, but it turns out I have nothing going on there. So let's check this out. I think there's a couple of things going on here, and I want to start with the idea of signs and houses that you just don't have anything in. It's totally okay to just not have anything in that area. It just means that in this life, you just haven't really factored in any to-do there. We all have different strengths and weaknesses, and in order to focus on one area, sometimes that just means that another area is just spacious and wide open. I've had people ask me before, what is it like? Is that like a weakness for me? Is that like a bad thing to not have anything in one sign or a house? No, it's not a bad thing. It just means that it's not really an area of focus for your life, unless, and this is where the second part comes in, the best way to work with signs and houses that you don't really have anything in is to notice when they're activated by transit. So when the planets in the sky are moving through, in your case, Dana, Libra, how do you feel? What do you notice? How does your life change? What sorts of situations keep popping up? That's the best way to figure out your relationship to Libra energy. So, an easy way to do this is to see how you feel when the moon moves through Libra. So the moon moves quick, it moves through all the signs every 28 days, thereabouts. So you can always journal each month about what you notice. You can also take note of when the faster moving planets like Mercury, Venus, and Mars move through that sign too. So you can grab an ephemeris or just do a Google search. I'll put a link in the show notes for you. And that's a pretty simple way to get in touch with it. I am obsessed with astrology journaling. I've done astrology journaling with all of my astrology students from the very beginning, and it's such a powerful practice, and I will never stop yelling about it. So as far as identifying with the traits of a sign but not having it in your chart anywhere, to me that just means that it's probably present in another way. So I'm looking at your chart a little right now, and it seems like, for example, like if you feel a close connection to Libra, like you mentioned, you could always check on the 7th house, which corresponds with Libra, and see what you've got there. So it turns out that you've got Jupiter and Pluto in your 7th house. And that Jupiter is also dominant in Sagittarius, which amplifies the effect, and it's very near your descendant. So the descendant is the point exactly opposite the ascendant, and whereas the ascendant is the self, the descendant is the other. So it's usually partnership, whether it's romantic, best friendship, business partnership, and any sort of one-on-one kind of scenario. So Jupiter does give an exaggerated emphasis wherever it is. It's something that you have a voracious appetite for and just really crave. And so with Jupiter in the 7th, especially with Pluto there, Pluto is such a magnifier, there is a pronounced emphasis on relationships. So you're not crazy. Just because you don't have a Libra in your chart, in any of your placements, everybody has Libra in their chart somewhere. In this situation, I didn't put this in my notes, but I was just thinking about how the 5th house is associated with romance and creativity and those sorts of like beginning stage relationships, like flirtations, even if it's in a friendly sort of way that spark that feeling of butterflies and excitement. And so, you might be feeling the relationship piece from that too. The 5th house is very much associated with relationships that have sort of more of a love flair to them. The people pleasing could also come from other sources. I looked at your Mercury retrograde in Aquarius opposite your Mars retrograde in Leo by sign. So to me, that sounds like lots of confusion around getting your needs met while communicating what's best for the group, right? It's a sort of self versus what's best for the larger whole. And also a retrograde Mercury on your sun in midheaven means that it can be a challenge to be really visible in your own life and be seen. And that's really central to how you feel about yourself. And also, I see that your moon is hidden away in the 12th house. And again, that's an indicator to me with the 12th house being hidden things that the moon, which is your emotional needs, can get sort of squirreled away and shut off and secreted away. Or even ignored, right? So yeah, the people pleasing is there, but it has so much more nuance and depth than just Libra, and that's what's so beautiful about the natal chart. So, people pleasing is kind of a blanket statement too, and so the beauty of the whole chart is being able to peel back those petals and see like, where is that really coming from, right? Is it a desire to like hide away your own emotional needs? Is it fear of being seen and so therefore putting other people first? Is it communication breakdown and just needing a little more clarity? That's what astrology is so good at. So I hope that this helped you. And yeah, everybody who has empty signs or houses, take note of them, take note of when the moon and the personal planets pass through, and see if that helps you connect. Okay, next up we have Amanda, and she says, my question is, how would you interpret Chiron and Jupiter, her natal Jupiter was retrograde, together in the same house? For her, it is the 4th house in Cancer, so it's exalted, but I am sure it being retrograde with Chiron affects things. Ooh, okay, so I really, really like this. So when I pulled up the chart and looked, so yeah, like you mentioned, Chiron and Jupiter here aren't conjunct each other. They're far enough apart that it wouldn't matter. So for me, a Chiron conjunction, I'm looking for within 10 degrees. I'd really love to see it within 5 degrees or even 1 or 2 degrees for it to make a huge difference. So yeah, they're in the same sign, but they aren't technically conjunct. So the term for that is called co-presence. It's gained a lot more popularity with the rise of traditional and Hellenistic astrology styles, and I actually find it to be a really useful construct, and I think about it often. So when points in the chart share a sign, they're gonna be in conversation with each other, right? So they might not be exactly on top of each other. They're not like holding hands, but they're in the same room, right? And they are seeing from the same angles. So the conjunction, again, is where it's within just a certain number of degrees, but co-presence is just anytime it's in the same sign. I've noticed this a lot more with transits. So as soon as, one planet moves into the same sign as another, like let's say, for example, we have a Mars-Uranus conjunction coming up in January. So as soon as Mars moves into Taurus, I expect to feel that pretty strongly. So that's a piece of the puzzle here. So I do think that your Chiron is more pronounced because it's within 1 degree of your IC, which we love to talk about on these videos. There's tons of videos on what the IC is, but just like the quick refresher. So point opposite the midheaven, and it is associated with family and emotions and kind of the backbone of your chart. It's your roots, like where you come from, the actual place where you live, the physical space that you reside in, all of those things, but also just the way you feel, the way you inhabit your body. So with Chiron there at the very base of your chart, you are more drawn to that. Issues related to healing your deep emotional wounds, which is like the point of the IC, are going to be extremely prominent through your whole life, right? It's kind of like your whole deal, especially with it being in Cancer, is like this initiation and kind of unraveling pieces and then retying them together, reweaving them, I guess, relating to family and whatever that means to you. Family can mean a lot of things. It doesn't have to mean the people who you're related to, although it can be chosen family. You know, you get to pick who you feel that close to. So keep that in mind as well. So as far as Jupiter being retrograde in this case, so Jupiter retrograde is a pretty common occurrence. It's retrograde for about 5 months out of the year. I'll put the exact stats in the show notes. Because it's retrograde for so many months of the year, it's not as infrequent as a Mercury, Venus, or Mars retrograde. It's just more typical, and so a lot of astrologers don't even super consider it. I do keep an eye on it. I think that any retrograde planet, I also have Jupiter retrograde, by the way. Any retrograde planet, it sort of turns its energy inward, right? So the energy of Jupiter for you might be expressed through just your spirituality instead of, you know, outward pursuits, right? Also, you can have kind of a late bloomer effect. Like you can feel kind of unlucky early in life, and then once you pass that Saturn return hurdle, you feel really good, like you can just expand and you have more of an idea of who you are. It's kind of like an ugly duckling syndrome into the beautiful swan. So that's certainly a piece of it. But I think the biggest things in play here is that, like you pointed out, Jupiter is exalted, and then Chiron being on the IC in Cancer. So you've definitely picked up on the right things. Reading them together, I think that, you know, Jupiter exalted in Cancer makes me think of generosity, like the generous host who wants to throw the most amazing party. Like we're very much in the holiday season, and you imagine back when we could have like in-person gatherings, you go and they have the eggnog and the beautiful charcuterie board and the wine and all of that. Not that I'm like pining for that right now. And you go and, you know, you talk about philosophy and art and all the fun memories from the year. Like that's a very Jupiter and Cancer thing. Cancer is often like a traveler type. Think of Anthony Bourdain or Elizabeth Gilbert, right? Who can make themselves feel at home anywhere. And so I think you with Jupiter there are that, right? You're able to heal both yourself and others by making yourself and others feel at home wherever you are. I would say the only pitfall of it would be allowing like too much intimacy too quickly. So boundaries are everything, but as long as you don't like overshoot the mark, I think you're gonna do great with this placement, and I hope that helps. Okay, so next up we have Jason. Hello, Jason. It says, hey, Amelia, I want to continue my centaur questions with a crucial one in my chart. Is Chiron a major body? Y'all are so into Chiron. I'm going to have to find a Chiron expert and get them to come on the show to talk to y'all. Maybe like a bonus episode or something. Jason says, a couple of months ago, you identified a T-square in my fixed signs, but some others have identified that pattern as a grand cross with Chiron and Taurus. To my understanding, this is a kind of major difference in the structured energy of the chart if it is providing a kind of mutual sustaining tension as in a grand cross, versus if it is the release point or answer for the T-square if it's not a grand cross or aligned with the release point. What do you make of this situation? So, all right, let's break this down into pieces. My favorite thing to do. The first piece of this is Chiron a major body? Very controversial question. It's not as hot button of an issue as other things. We aren't talking about eclipses, but I think that whether or not Chiron is a major body depends completely on the astrologer doing the reading. Everybody has their own beliefs about Chiron. To me, I don't know that I would call Chiron a major body, and let me explain why. I will say that Chiron Chiron and Lilith are things that I use in every single chart that I pull. I look at Chiron and Lilith. It doesn't mean that they are going to be a part of every interpretation. I'm just looking to see those important points like you were talking about, like conjunct a luminary, conjunct an angle, maybe conjunct one of the other planets, and that would give me more information. So for me, the bigger asteroids like Chiron and the 4 famous goddess asteroids popularized by Demetra George, so that's Ceres, Vesta, Pallas, and Juno, can become major bodies if they're in a prominent position like you were discussing. So for example, a release point for a chart pattern like your Grand Cross, or if they're conjunct another planet or angle like a luminary, so like I just explained. For the asteroids that have less research behind them or are actually like physically smaller in size, I wouldn't use those in the same way. I would want to see them just conjunct a point, maybe with like 1 degree, 1 or 2 degrees max. And I wouldn't, they're more of a flavor to the major body. They're not the whole entree. They're more of a snack. They're the astrological snack food. Though they can give this, they can bring forward themes that exist in the rest of the chart and really give you, I find them to be especially useful in identifying, especially folks who have a magical bent or are interested in mythology, like certain stories that will, in an eerie way, kind of pull through their life. Eerie in a positive way, like it's fun, spooky. So for me, it's sort of based in logic. So asteroids considered to be dwarf planets or minor planets are more important to the scientific community. And I try to reflect that in my interpretations, though I do sometimes make concessions depending on the story of the chart. Chiron is an outlier in this way, but there's more astrological evidence behind, because Chiron became so popular for a period. We do know a lot about how it works and its position. So the weird thing about Chiron is it is an asteroid, but it's also a comet. Like, you should look it up and check it out. Yeah, it's classified as both. So to me, that's part of the reason why I'm kind of like, I'm not on Chiron. We talk about it a ton. I definitely use it, but it's not something that I seek out as much. I think we still, as far as how it actually functions, like I think there's still so much more to learn. You know who has done a wonderful job digging deeper into the Chiron mythos, I will also link this in the show notes, is Mystic Medusa, talking about how Chiron, being a point between Saturn and Uranus, has this sort of sci-fi, like between the past and the future vibe. So yeah, but the point is that this is why astrology research is important and experimentation is absolutely essential. So every new point in astrology was once just like a funny footnote in someone's astrology journal or a rabbit hole or just something they wanted to try out. So you could be the first person ever to come up with something new. And not everything you do will stick, and not every astrological hypothesis you have will be proven correct in the end. I mean, mine certainly all haven't, but it sure is fun to try, and it sure does feel good when you're able to get it right. So I hope that answers your question. To the point about your specific Grand Cross, yeah, I could see Chiron as the offshoot for a Grand Cross. I was mostly focusing on those specific energies. I'm pretty sure just central to the question you were asking, but I'll look it up and I'll get in touch with you by email. Yeah, I hope that helps. Good luck. Alrighty, so this next question is from Lindsay, who says, I'm wondering if you could share more with me about the asteroids in my chart. Y'all love asteroids, and I love you for that. Vesta opposes a little cluster of asteroids plus my north node, so Lilith, Sedna, and Pholus. I was curious what you would make of all that, especially the Lilith-Vesta opposition, since they inherently embody opposite feminine energy. Especially since I feel like I have such a prominent and masculine energy in my chart. This is really, really interesting. And I think it's definitely something you could benefit from a deeper reading, but I'm going to do my best to dig into what you have quickly. So at a glance, Lilith on your North Node in Taurus and your 5th house is really significant. That's the kind of thing that I'm looking for with Lilith or the other goddesses, to see, is this a really big theme in your life? Also, an aside, Lilith is actually not an asteroid. Like the nodes, she's a mathematical point. I know it's confusing because there's also an asteroid Lilith, and there's also an alternative mathematical formula for Lilith called Waldemath's Black Moon Lilith. But the proper Black Moon Lilith is what I use in my calculations, and yeah, that's the one you should be using. It's usually the default on most chart configurations, including astro.com, which is the one I always direct you to. So I was looking at this Lilith on the North Node, and did you know you're about to have a Lilith return? So Lilith takes 9 years to go around the zodiac, staying 9 months in each sign, which feels really, really magical. And when she returns to the same degree as your natal Lilith, you get increased focus on sexuality and righteous anger and feelings of wildness and just wanting to break free and be independent. So that's really cool, and I wonder if that's why you're focusing on Lilith as a thing right now. Beyond that, Vesta on your South Node in Scorpio in the 11th house feels really magical. Like, I rarely say things like this, so goddess help me, but like past lives as a priestess or something, though it can also be you going into service mode to the group and eschewing your own pleasure. I also noticed that you have Hecate on your Mercury retrograde conjunct Mars in Leo, which gives you this sort of dark and tricky kind of glamour, right? Just make sure that you're using, Hecate is I don't know, I think a lot spookier and darker than people give her credit for. It's the sort of like red tooth bone, you know, darkness, crossroads goddess, so of the Greeks. So yeah, I think that people with Hecate in their chart definitely have a little bit of spooky energy to them and are naturally witchy, so I really like that for you too. But yeah, the fact that Vesta and Lilith are on your nodal axis makes them even more important, and you're right. I think that they are opposing energies, but if you go back and listen to the episode Vesta Rules, and maybe we'll do another Vesta deep dive at some point, Vesta can also be people who are deeply sexual and use that sexuality in some sort of like to sublimate into art, or even who like go swing far to the other pole of like being very strongly sexual and having that strong inner fire burning. So yeah, definitely a little bit more of a deep dive into Vesta would be great. Definitely read Asteroid Goddesses. Yeah, Vesta is not always the absence of sex. Sometimes Vesta is the sublimation of the sexual drive into some other channel, or she can be like sacred sexuality. So keep that in mind too. And I feel like in that way, she's almost like aligned with Lilith, but with it being the 5th and the 11th houses, I definitely think like service versus independence is kind of the trick here. So there are many more asteroids we could look at, but if you want to do that, I think a one-on-one reading together would be great. Also, it feels like as good a time as any to mention that in 2021, I'm going to be putting together a course on the asteroids since y'all love them so much, and maybe a couple of other points like Lilith and Chiron, since we have had a lot of questions. So if that's something that you or y'all would be interested in, that's going to be coming hopefully soon. Fingers crossed. I have some time set aside to work on that this winter. Also, I'm not an expert on every asteroid by any stretch of the imagination. The centaurs, so that's Chiron, Pholus, Nessus, so we've talked about a little bit on the Q&As, aren't my specialty, but for that I recommend SJ Anderson on Twitter. Their feed is delightful. I will put their site in my show notes here. I'm also not too big on Sedna, only because I don't know that much about that mythos, and I'm still learning. So in that way, the asteroids that I use are really connected to my witchcraft and magical practice, as well as my own mythological studies. So yeah, that's why I select some and not others. But I hope this helped, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, next up, I'm gonna keep this person's name private because they're going through a lot, but I see you and I appreciate you. It says, I just had a very rough and out of the blue breakup a couple weeks ago of my partner of 5 years. Wow. When I was feeling like things were really good between us, and it felt like he was finally putting in the work and getting better at expressing all those emotions. He's a Cancer sun, Venus, and Mercury. Wow, lots of Cancer. I'm feeling confused and heartbroken, and I know we're in the midst of both a Mars retrograde and Mercury retrograde shadow at the time it happened. And I guess my question is, are there any upcoming transits I can be looking to for comfort and or clarity? Realizing that maybe those things aren't the same. Yeah, absolutely. This also makes me think back to my August question about Mars making squares to my sun and natal Mars. Okay, so first off, I just want to say that you were so thoughtful to acknowledge that comfort and clarity aren't the same, and they're both essential in situations like this. And you're very brave to be open to both, right? I think it's two sides of a coin. It's the severity and mercy balance. So I'm going to give you a little bit of both. I'm going to start with clarity and move towards comfort. So for the clarity piece of this equation, I think it really is all about the nodes in this situation. So looking at your chart, your north node, and the north node is on your ascendant right now, while the south node is on your descendant, which is really intense. It's really pointing out negative relationship patterns and what you need to eliminate, right? So I just recorded a couple weeks ago, and I cannot wait for y'all to hear it, an episode with a wonderful, wonderful expert on the nodes, and they gave such a beautiful description. But TLDR, the nodes are also referred to as the head and the tail of the dragon. And so the south node is kind of, you can think of it as being shitty, right? Like I'm having the south node through my first house, and it can't be over soon enough. Definitely feels shitty. But only because it's like putting on, you ever get your eyes checked and like you put on the glasses and they're like, better one, better two, and they get the one that you're like, oh my God, I see so much more clearly now. And like, it's not even that different, but you see with everything so much sharper, and it's like you almost get a headache after the first time they switch your prescription because you're like, God, I can see everything and I'm overwhelmed. That's a nodal experience, right? And the north node is pushing you towards, I really do believe the north node is the best you can do in that area of your life. And so, with the north node being on your descendant, or on your ascendant, and the south node on your descendant, like this is such a beautiful opportunity for you to come home to yourself, really see yourself in that kind of sharp relief, and just take care of you and do what you need to do for you. And everything in life is a balance with the nodes, and that means eliminating perhaps unexpectedly relationship patterns that maybe they felt comfortable, but sometimes moving towards what's better isn't comfortable, like you already identified. So also, because Uranus is conjunct your descendant, it makes sense that this feels totally out of the blue and just random. So the angles and the nodes, those transits don't feel good a lot of the time, but they definitely change things dramatically. So this is a pretty textbook case, and I wish I can give you a huge hug and just tell you that everything is going to be all right. So also, not to mention Saturn and Pluto are opposing your sun, which can't be understated. This is the 2nd and 8th house axis, which has to do with value and worthiness. And it would make sense if you're feeling things like, why wasn't I enough for this person? It sounds really trite, but I think that in this case, you should ask yourself, why weren't they enough for you, right? Also, the Gemini lunar eclipse, which is coming up in your first house, I think will be tough, especially opposite Saturn and Juno in your 7th house. But all is not lost. I think that the Great Conjunction is going to be so lovely for you in your 9th house. And we've talked about your 9th house in one of these. And both Jupiter and Saturn out of your 8th house, I think it's going to just be like relieving some of that pressure. Like all of this intense focus is being put on intimate relationships. Like you get to move on and do something like completely different and just switch gears, and hopefully like expand outwards and find things that are fun and adventurous and just take your mind off it. For comfort, this is really exciting. This is the kind of news that I always hope to give people. In 2022, like you're coming up on a Jupiter return and you get a little taste of that next summer. And that's that's one of the best transits you can possibly have. Jupiter returns are like Saturn returns, but the inverse. You get all of the health, wealth, good luck, success. Only way you can really do a Jupiter return badly is to overdo things. So like give yourself space to celebrate, but like don't go on a bender. You get the basic idea, but you will have plenty to celebrate. And I think this will be a situation where you look back and you're like, that person is going to be so jealous. And, honestly, you'll be moved on to such a point that it won't even like clock, right? Like you'll have so many lovely things going on that you just get to float away into your future. So best wishes, sending love and care. And I hope everything goes well. Jupiter will take care of that, I promise. Okay, so last question, I believe, comes from another Amanda. It says, okay, so my question is, can you tell me anything about the 2 yods I have among my Jupiter and Mars in relation to Uranus and Neptune? I'm still a beginner and aspects are confusing. Aspects are really confusing. They took me a long time to get the hang of too. Any guidance is greatly appreciated. So just to break it down for y'all, this person has Neptune at 11 degrees Capricorn and Uranus at 5 degrees Capricorn, both in their 3rd house. So really sharp communication with lots of authority and creativity. Like a power storyteller. Then Jupiter at 6 degrees Leo in the 10th house, and Mars at 8 degrees Gemini in the 8th house. So, I really love this actually. So when we are breaking down yods, the best way to do it is, at least the way that I do it first, is look at the sextile. So for you, that would be Jupiter and Mars, to figure out what the baseline energy you're dealing with is. So sextiles are like little gifts from the universe, or maybe more like little invitations, right? It's kind of like getting a Hogwarts letter. Maybe not that, because fuck J.K. Rowling, but you get this invite in the mail. You still have to figure out how to get to that place. It's not like all expenses paid, but like you have that gift within you. You have the opportunity, and you get to make the most of it. So with Jupiter in Leo, sextile Mars and Gemini, you just have boundless energy for performance. Like I would love to see you do whatever you're good at, because honestly, you're also an incredible networker and leader of people. So I could see you as someone who is a performer, has tons of followers. So that's the baseline that we're working with. Then you look at the apex planet, which is the one that's in conjunct in the other 2, also called a quincunx, but I've never heard anybody in astrology actually like say that. It's like Uranus. It's a fake word. So you look to the apex planet to see where the opportunity or natural talent is pushing you, even if it's a tense thing, it's awkward, or it requires some kind of adjustment. And then finally, check out the 2 quincunxes, because those 2 planets, which are in conjunct one another, astrologically, they can't see each other, right? It's like you're calling that you really like them, and they are, they work like the next floor up, and you occasionally pass each other in the stairwell, but you never actually get to talk. You're like, oh yeah, blah, blah, we'll talk, and it never actually happens. So it's just, or it can be a situation where it's awkward because things are so different. There's a meme that I really love, and I think David Duchovny shaking hands with Marilyn Manson, and like he's so normcore and basic, and Marilyn Manson is so goth, and it's like when you're friends but you're riding 2 different waves. I think that quincunxes are kind of the embodiment of that energy. So you have to get more creative with quincunxes to find a common ground between those planets. But the good news is that because it is a little weird and a little different, that weirdness gives it a sparkle. So yeah, so in this case, that would be your Jupiter and Neptune quincunx one another. It's really lovely. Those are the two spirituality and party planets. You're able to stay grounded while still having a really, really excellent time. And then Mars quincunx Neptune, that's really interesting too. Like, you're able to be ambitious and very glamorous. I'm just so curious about how this is playing out in your life right now, but that's the trick. Yeah, check the sextile, check the apex planet, and then break down those quincunxes, and then do your best to figure out the rest. All right, that's it. That's all the questions that we have this month. Y'all asked the most thoughtful and insightful questions, and it's such joy to get to answer them for you. And that's not a fake thing. Like, that's just every single time I read them, I'm like, wow, Bad Astrologers followers are it. Y'all are so smart. So thank you so much for supporting me for all this time. I cannot wait for the new year, and I have lots of exciting things planned to share with you, and keep sending great questions. I can't wait to make the next video. Thank you.